Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals for the agenda meeting of September 14th, 2021. We have a published start time of 7 p.m., but as is typical, we, in the sort of Zoom environment, we like to give a few minutes after the start time just to allow folks to log on and get themselves settled. And once we do, I think we'll probably have a start time of say 7:03, 7:05, so a few more moments, and we'll kick things off and we'll move through the meeting agenda, which is available in the City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals website. And it will begin with our roll call, our public hearings, and then we'll go right into our published hearings for this evening, two of which we have requests for continuances. We'll take care of those first, so that anyone who might be logging on to be heard in connection with those will have the opportunity to know that we are going to continue them so that they do not have to listen in for the duration only to find that out. So just another moment or two and I'll join you back and we'll get things started. We'll introduce our board, establish a quorum, and jump right into the business of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals for September 14th, 2021. Okay, looks like the time is now 7:01. I see that we have about 11 attendees. We're going to get things started just so that we can be respectful to everyone's timeline. My name is Rob Ciampetti. I'm the chairman of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. Welcome. If you're just logging on, this is our Zoning Board of Appeals hearing date of September 14th, 2021, with a published start time of 7 p.m. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go to the City of Newburyport website, or Google City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. It will take you to the link that will get you to our agenda so that you can follow along. All of the materials that are being referenced this evening will be put up by our city planner, Caitlin Sullivan, who will be putting up every slide so that anyone who's watching via Zoom and following along via Zoom can follow along and see the materials that are being referenced. So without further ado, I'm going to begin by calling our roll, and once we do, we'll establish a quorum. I'll go over the sort of the lay of the land, basically the rules of the road for ZBA hearings for those that are new to it. We'll then jump right in and start our process for this evening. So calling to order our City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, September 14th, 2021. We are going to begin by calling the roll, and I will just ask members of the ZBA, please respond when I call your name in the roll by either saying here or present, and we will figure out whether we have a quorum and can proceed with the business of ZBA tonight. Mr. Mark Moore.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Stephen Delisle. Mr. Ken Swanton.
Here.
Mr. Walter Channon.
Here.
Mr. Gregory Bennick.
Present.
And Rob Ciampetti, I'm present. That's 5 members that are present. Just for the members of the public that are listening in, we require at least 4 members of the ZBA to be present in order to have a quorum. We have 5. Our voting members this evening will be Mr. Moore, Mr. Swanton, Mr. Channon, Mr. Bennick, and myself. And let me just take a quick look here. We, having called the roll, we can establish that we have a quorum and we'll proceed to the public hearing. Before I do, I just want to take a moment and introduce those members of the panel that are on this evening. I'll begin by introducing Mr. Mark Moore, who's our vice chair. Mr. Stephen Delisle is our secretary, although he did not at least initially respond, so he may or may not. Andy, do we know if Mr. Moore he's not going to be present this evening?
He's with us. Mark,
this is Mr. Moore. I'm here, but
I'm sorry,
Stephen won't be.
I meant Mr. Delisle.
Yep.
Yeah. We had expected him, I think, to be here. He's not here at the moment.
Okay, so we will make sure that we include Mr. Delisle if he does Once he logs on, we'll make sure that he's included in the quorum.
I
Mr.
think,
Ken
I
Swanton.
think he's, yeah, I just want to say, this is Ken Swan. I think Stephen sent a note to us all saying that he would not be able to make it tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. I hadn't seen that yet. So that means that Mr. Delisle will not be present for this evening. So that the members present will be myself, Rob Champetti, Mr. Moore, Mr. Swanton, Mr. Shannon, Mr. Bennett. So moving on, and thank you for that, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Ken Swanton, ZBA member, Mr. Walter Shannon, ZBA member, and Mr. Gregory Bennett, associate member. In addition to our panelists, we also have Caitlin Sullivan, our city planner, and of course, Mr. Andy Port, our planning director. Also keeping the minutes, our keeper of the record this evening and every evening is the incredible Miss Gretchen Joy, who will write down everything that all of us say. So to that point, if I can ask that anyone who does choose to speak during the public comment section, so that Miss Joy can keep our record and keep our minutes for any member of the public to refer to, ourselves included, and any others, we ask that you kindly just give your name and your address so that when we get to the public comment section, it's clear who's speaking and we can record that properly. Again, my name is Rob Champetti and I'm chairman of the ZBA. So with that, we have established a quorum. I'm pleased to introduce the board, and without further ado, we will now get into our ZBA agenda for this evening, starting first with two matters that I believe we've received requests for continuances. We'll get those dealt with first. First is 22-24 Olive Street LLC, care of attorney Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The application is a special permit for nonconformities. We've received a written request for a continuance, and as is typical for our board, we always extend the courtesy of granting such continuances unless there's some prevailing reason not to, and there certainly isn't in this instance. Attorney Mead, if you're on the Zoom call, do you wish to be heard, or may we proceed on your request to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please just proceed on my request to continue.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. Members of the ZBA, we have a request to continue the matter of 2224 Olive Street LLC. And Andy, do we have a date? And I know that we do. I just can't seem to lay hands on it. What's the date that Attorney Mead is requesting?
September 28th.
Oh, thank you, Attorney Mead. So the applicant has requested a continuance to September 28th on the matter of 2224 Olive Street LLC. Members of the ZBA, I will call up the roll on the motion to continue that matter by the applicant's request. First, let me ask, do we have a motion to continue in a second?
So moved, Mr. Moore.
Seconded, Mr. Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Swanton, for the second. We have a motion made and seconded by Mr. Moore and Mr. Delisle. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle, absent, I'm sorry. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The matter is continued. And thank you, Attorney Mead. Moving on to the next matter that I believe we have a request for a continuance on. And Andy, forgive me, is this 276 High Street? Have we received a request to continue that as well?
Yep, it's my understanding.
No.
No.
Chair,
No.
Caitlin, we have a request to continue for 30 Winter Street to 9/28/21.
Not 276 High Street?
That's a public hearing for tonight. I wasn't sure if you were going to take the two continuances first.
Very good. Then moving to the next request for a continuance, we have the matter, applicant's name, Eric Primack, 30 Winter Street. It's a special permit for nonconformities. We have a written request to continue. Do we have, Mr. Primack, if you're on the Zoom call, do you wish to be heard, or may we proceed with your request?
He's not expected to be present tonight, Chair.
Thank you, Caitlin. Members of the ZBA, we have a written request to continue the matter of 30 Winter Street. And Caitlin, I'm sorry, the date again?
9/28/21.
9/28/21. Calling the roll. Well, pardon me. First, do we have a motion and a second?
So moved, Mr. Moore.
So seconded, Mr. Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Moore on the motion, Mr. Swanton on the second. Calling the roll on the motion to continue. Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
Mr. Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the matter of 3 Winter Street is continued to the meeting of September 28th. Moving now to our first public hearing, which leaves us with 2 public hearings this evening. So members of the any attendees to the Zoom ZBA this evening, if you were here for either 2224 Olive Street or 30 Winter Street, please note those matters have now been continued. You do not need to stay on this Zoom call any further, but do please return back on those return dates and log back in so that if you wish to speak and be heard, that your comments can be included in our deliberations and in our public hearing. Moving now to our full public hearing. This is the matter of Christopher and Holly Ragusa, trustees, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. It is the application for 276 High Street, a special permit to remove later additions on accessory barn and move to a different location on the lot. Attorney Mead, you have the floor for the applicant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, on behalf of Christopher and Holly Ragusa trustees, who are the owners of 276 High Street. With me here this evening is also Scott Brown, who's the architect on the project, and Aaron Sturgis, who is the preservation consultant on the project as well. This property, we are here for DCOD special permit, as the chair suggested, to remove later added additions from this barn and relocate the barn on the lot. The property is located, and you can go to the next slide, please. The property is located in the R2 zoning district and the demolition control overlay district. It includes a single family structure and a freestanding barn. No work is proposed on the single family structure, which was constructed around 1850. The barn also dates to approximately 1850, but has had some later added additions, which we'll talk about later. Both structures are listed as contributory on the district data sheets. The property is 18,974 square feet, where 10,000 are required. That includes 90.5 feet of frontage, where 90 feet are required. The lot is a fully conforming lot on High Street. The barn is currently located 10.8 feet off the southerly lot line and near the middle of the property, back to front. The proposal is to remove the later added additions to the barn, move the barn towards the rear of the property, still within the zoning dimensional requirements, and then construct an addition onto the barn. The removal of the portions of the barn and the movement from one location to another of the property is considered demolition under the DCOD. The applicant has been to the Historic Commission, who has issued a report to the board. That was in May of this year. To go to the next slide, please. So the barn was built in or around 1850, according to the district data sheets, and is described as a carriage house. There is no Form B for this property. The district data sheets consider the house and the barn to be contributory to the district. It would appear as though a portion of the rear addition on the barn was added between 1914 and 1925 from the Sanborn maps and early Assessors Map, which I'll talk about in a minute. After a review of the relevant deeds to the property, it appears the structures were built between 1849 and 1863. In 1849, the then owner of the premises, Thomas Emery, who also owned the adjacent portion of land, deeded the land, now known as 276 High Street, to Edwin Grosvenor, a physician. There's no indication in that deed that any buildings existed on the land at that time. However, in 1863, by the time Grosvenor conveyed the property, Newburyport had split from Newbury, Grosvenor had died, and his estate conveyed his descendancy to Henry Merrill. This deed is at book 662, page 7, and it includes a reference to the buildings thereon. Therefore, it would appear that the structures on the property were constructed between 1849 and 1863. The property has had few owners. Aside from the original Emery family, the property was owned by the Merrill family, where it remained from 1863 until 1917. It was then conveyed to Edith Bartlett. The Bartlett family owned the property for over 100 years until it was conveyed to the applicants in 2020. A descendant of the Bartletts still live in the property. So the barn does appear in 1900, 1906, 1914, and on the 1925 maps. If you could go to the next page, please. So if you look at this plan, you can see High Street to the left. It's the second lot in. And you can see the barn right there near Andy's cursor. So this is the 1914 Sanborn map. And the next slide, please. Then we have the assessor's map from 1925. And this, if you go down to the bottom of the plan, and there you go, right there is this property. And you can see the barn again, which has the addition on the rear. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the commission determined that the removal of the later added additions would help preserve the barn into the future. And Aaron is going to talk about that in a minute. The commission commented that the original proposed redesign of the structure was too ornate and requested the applicant to simplify its design, which is done, and Scott will review that. The commission was concerned about the relocation of the barn where the applicant originally proposed on the west side of the property. So I'll talk about that in a little bit, but originally the proposal was to move the barn to the rear and to the west, the entirely different side. So the applicant has changed the proposal to relocate the barn and move it directly back in the same plane as the existing barn. So it's not as suggested by the commission, but it's certainly along the same plane. And you'll see shortly how it's still visible and has a relationship to the main structure. So we've provided a current conditions report from Aaron Sturgis of Preservation Timber Framing, Inc. And I'm going to turn it over to have Aaron review the fact about the newer additions which are causing harm to the original barn, and the removal of those will help preserve the barn in the future. So Aaron?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great, great. If we could go to the next slide. The original barn is a carriage barn. It definitely dates to 1849. That time frame works perfectly. The additions that are added to it are illustrated in the next slide. If you could go to the next slide for us. You can see an addition on the back. You can see that the side that on the front view, which is the lower right front elevation, from the first garage door, then the second garage door. So that is also an addition. So the carriage barn is really everything in that lower right-hand corner to your left from the dividing line. The next picture will show that as well, but I wanted to show you the drawing and the elevations because the original carriage barn is on a failing foundation, but it's better than the foundations, which are almost non-existent for the additions in the 1914, 1925 era. The next slide, if you could. So here you really see a stark difference between the foundations. The original foundation is also, inadequate, but certainly better than the little frost piers that are holding up the back shed. And then on the lower right-hand corner, you see the garage door, which is at grade. There's no foundation at all. And if you look up along the line between the doors, you can actually see quite a large hump in the roof line, and that is indicative of the later addition, which didn't really line up with the original carriage barn and actually has a different plane of floor because it's basically on the ground. Unfortunately, when we looked at these additions, even though 1925 was a long time ago, they were failing and they actually have a negative impact on the original carriage barn. The original carriage barn is a timber frame structure, fully mortised and tenoned, and quite a neat little structure unto itself, really self-contained carriage barn. And its best use is in a different location. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So it needs considerable structural repair, largely because of the additions. The fact that they are not on the same type of foundation has kind of pulled and pushed the original carriage barn around. And then the rear addition, they actually cut out a structural post and cut out some of the studs that were original to the original carriage barn to gain entrance into the L. And that has obviously compromised the roof line and so forth. All repairable, but certainly the best way to fix the original earliest timber frame structure is to remove the later additions, and it brings it back to its original form. that goes with the house because they are contemporary to each other. I hope that makes sense to everyone. And then do you want me to talk a little bit about the move at this point, or do you want to go on?
Yeah,
Lisa?
I think go ahead, Aaron, and then we'll
Okay,
turn it over
so
to Scott here in a
when
minute.
we talk about doing a good positive restoration, we like to put the carriage barn on a new foundation. Its best use for the property and how the barn is sited from the street is to move it back. And the best way to fix the structural issues that are a part of this carriage barn is to put it on a solid foundation. If you're going to put the effort into preserving the barn, you want to make sure that it's on a really good foundation. So we actually, our role here would be to remove the additions that are hurting the original form, then pick the building up as a unit on steel and roll it to the new foundation. We roll it over that foundation and onto a nice level surface, and then we do the structural repair. Sometimes, and I think we'll have to do this, we have to stitch some of the walls back together in order for the move to work perfectly. But that's because of the damage that's occurred over time with the back addition specifically, because they had literally cut out a structural post. But it seems a little counterintuitive that you would do the repair after you're on the new foundation. But in fact, it's the best way to have the building as level and plumb as possible. And we have a control to go to, which is in fact a new foundation. So when we do the assessment and look at all of the things that are involved with repairing and moving the building, we have a much more accurate idea of the size of the original carriage barn. We have the exact foundation size based on the timber frame that we have meticulously measured that remains intact. So we have all the information we need to put the carriage barn back into its original form. And we place it on a new foundation and make it a lot more usable and promote its best use on the property. So that's essentially what we're thinking about doing. We use a professional building mover. There's no risk at all of the building decaying or falling apart in any way. But we do have some work to do to make it structurally sound. And I know Chris and Holly are very interested in doing that. And an important part of that is to get it on, a really good foundation and make it whole again. So that's the idea there. What am I missing, Lisa?
So I think that when we get to the site plan, Aaron, we'll talk about the location and and how it is moved to that and the least risky way to do that.
Yep. I will just say that in its current state, it is unsound. I mean, it is these foundations that are on the appendages, if you will, the L's and the back addition are really yanking on the original frame. So we'd like to get this moved onto a solid foundation and get the structural repairs done to make it, much more usable. It's not a usable building per se right now. You could store a few things in it, but it's underutilized because of its condition.
Thank you, Aaron.
You bet.
If you could go to the next slide, please, Andy. So as we've said, the proposal is that the demolition involves removing the later added addition to the barn while the original barn stays intact, move it to the new location, we'll have a level new foundation, and then add the proposed additions to the barn to be to the rear of the structure and subservient to the original structure, which Scott will talk about in a minute. Functionally, this changes will allow the barn to become a safe and useful and active accessory building once again, while preserving it for long-term future use. And then constructing the foundation further back presents less risk than moving the barn twice in order to construct a foundation within the footprint of the existing location. And next slide, please. So as I noted earlier, we appeared before the Historic Commission. The commissioners had a consensus that the design features on the renovated barn were too ornate, and that prior to the location, the prior location proposed to move the barn to the back left corner was unacceptable. To that end, they didn't settle exactly on how much the barn could be moved. The report does say 1 to 2 feet. I think if you hear the commission's discussion, there was a lot of discussion about that particular issue. To respond to the Historic Commission's comments, the applicant has redesigned the barn to make it more simplified, like the original structure that you've seen. And we're relocating it on the same visual line. So if you could go to the site plan, which is next, please, Andy. So right here is the site plan, and you can see the original structure under the driveway line there, and the proposal on where to move the barn to the rear. And in a moment, Scott's going to go over the details, but you can see that we have located the barn well within the required setbacks under zoning, and it is of a sufficient distance to allow the movement to occur once with the rebuilding of the foundation. And Aaron, I don't know if you have anything else to say about the movement of barn further back than what the Historic Commission has recommended.
I don't. I think this is in line with their intent. I think that was their concern, is that they wanted to be able to see the barn from the street. I do think that moving the barn back in its original form and having the addition to its rear gives it the original form that went with the house. So it's actually more in line with the original fabric of the intent of the property. And you will notice that the barn is smaller because the appendages are coming off. So it looks a little bit different than the shadow line that you see, but that's because we're restoring the original timber frame and adding a small addition to the rear, which is not visible from the street, that allows its best use, you know, for storage. And right now it's kind of small. You can't really put a car in it. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott now. And Scott, if you would like to go through the redesign.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa. Scott Brown, the architect for the project. If we just start, Caitlin, if we could just go back to the site plan, if you will, thank you. So one of the first things that you'll notice about this proposed site plan is that the house has an odd skewed relationship to the side lot lines. And the barn in its existing location is parallel to the side lot line. Because of this, the back of the house is oriented towards the barn and really has no relationship to the backyard. The current position of this barn really hinders one's enjoyment of the yard from the perspective of being in the house. And this is a great underutilized yard. It's lined with mature trees, which we intend to keep, and it really has sort of a nice sense of privacy. And our plan is to position this barn, our plan has always been to position this barn in a spot that gives us maximum flexibility to make use of the entire backyard and to open up view quarters from the house to the entire lot. So next slide, please, Caitlin. So these are our proposed elevations. And as Attorney Mead had already stated, these represent a vastly simplified design from what the Historic Commission first saw. So in the lower right-hand corner, this is our proposed front elevation. And this now looks a lot like it did in the 19th century, including at the time when it had a cupola. We're proposing to put a new cupola on this. The other three elevations that you are seeing here, the back rear elevation, the top right-hand corner, and both the left and right side elevations on the left side, they show this sort of one-story subservient addition that we're adding to the back of the original box. We're setting back the sidewalls of this addition. We are changing the cladding, sidewall cladding. And this is really about having a distinction between old and new and really respecting the form of the original barn structure. Next slide, please. So this is the existing street view, courtesy of Google. And we've included this really to sort of validate the accuracy of our renderings on the following page. Next slide, please, Caitlin. So these are two renderings, existing condition rendering shown at the top. And if we could just go back to the former slide. So this has a slightly different viewpoint, but I think you can all see that, our renderings are, next slide, please. That our rendering here is very accurate. And the bottom image here, this is the proposed barn in our new proposed location. So one of the concerns of the Historic Commission is that when we were originally proposing to put this in the back left corner of the lot, they were concerned that the public was no longer going to be able to enjoy this historic structure. So I think with this proposed rendering on the bottom of this sheet, I think it clearly demonstrates that we're all going to still be able to enjoy this, and we all are going to have a clear view corridor towards it. I would also argue that this, bringing this back to what it looked like in the 19th century, from a design standpoint, is clearly an improvement over what we're seeing in the top rendering. And the other thing I want to point out here is that we're making this smaller. And how many times in Newburyport is there an applicant before this board asking to make something smaller? And we're certainly doing that here. So our proposal is for a smaller footprint. Next slide, please. And finally, we've included this sheet because I think it clearly illustrates the drawing on the right as our existing floor plan. And this sheet sort of clearly illustrates those hatch walls, the walls that we're proposing to remove, that third bay that Aaron spoke about, that is not original to the barn, that we're removing. And on the left side, this is our new proposed floor plan, which shows that smaller one-story subservient addition that we're putting back on the back half of this structure. And with that, I will hand it back to Attorney Mead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. So under the Demolition Control Overlay District, the zoning board has a couple of findings that they have to make. One, essentially, and it's an odd application of the ordinance because we're not removing the barn, we're moving it. So there's a finding essentially that the historic building or structure retains no substantial remaining market value or use. But of course, we are keeping the barn itself. We're asking to remove portions of it. The board is aided in its determination based upon the Historic Commission's advisory report. And in this instance, the Historic Commission says it did not oppose the removal of the later or poorly constructed sections. They did indicate that the removal of the later added additions and the relocation of the barn to the solid foundation was appropriate to enable the barn to exist long into the future. The report from the historic preservation expert, Aaron Sturgis, and as he has said tonight, says these additions hide what is a very nice historic barn. They seriously compromise the structural integrity of the original barn and should be removed. And then the original barn can be repaired and saved. The right side is on simple piers, as Aaron has said, and poorly constructed and detracts from the original form of the structure. The second rear addition along the back eave is on minimal piers of cement blocks and lightly framed and negatively impacts the earlier structure. Both additions seriously compromise the structural integrity of the barn and should be removed. The structure sits on stone and partial foundations that are crumbling. The first floor framing has been greatly altered with a little original structure remaining. But there is hope, as Mr. Sturgis says, that the original barn can be saved and the later additions should be removed, and it's feasible and advisable to move the barn to the rear of the property and place it on a permanent frost wall and slab. So as to these items, the Historic Commission has agreed. The applicant is proposing to adaptively reuse the barn by reincorporating it into an area of the backyard that allows more full use of the yard while still preserving the barn. The renovations will bring the barn back to life to an integral part of the property once again. While the commission disagreed with moving the barn more than 1 or 2 feet, the applicant is of the position that such a stance by the commission is unreasonable. Indeed, as Mr. Sturgis has said, moving the barn once rather than twice, and he can highlight that again if you need to place it on a new foundation is less risky. The goal is to preserve and adaptively reuse the barn. From a constructability point of view, it will be preferential to construct an entire new foundation and then move the barn onto the new foundation. The mere shift 1 or 2 feet does not accomplish that goal. By moving the barn as proposed to a more fulsome use of the yard can occur, as Scott has said, and indeed the barn offers an appropriate backdrop to the yard. Additionally, given the new location that the applicant has proposed, the barn can still be seen from High Street and still runs along the same plane of the original barn. Once again, it can become a useful and used accessory building on the property, and the historic significance of the barn in relationship to the house and the property will not be lost. You can go to the next slide, please. The general special permit criteria are also applicable under this section, and I will go through those a little more quickly because they really apply to use, which is not changing. So section 10H7 are the general conditions related to special permits. 1, the requested use is listed on the table of use regulations. And here, as noted, the property is located in the R2 zoning district where a single family use is allowed by right. The requested use is essential or desirable to public convenience and welfare. Again, the use is a single family use is allowed by right in the R2 and therefore by its very nature has been determined by the city to be desirable. The requested use will not create undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. The continued use of the single family use and the movement on the property from one location to another will not create any undue traffic congestion or unduly impair pedestrian safety. In fact, there will be no change with that criteria whatsoever. The requested use will not overload the public water, drainage, or sewer system. Here, in fact, none of that will occur because the use won't change. And in fact, the footprint of the structure is becoming smaller and therefore there's a greater amount of open space on the property. Any special regulations for use are set forth in the special permit table are fulfilled. And in this instance, there are no special regulations. The requested use will not impair the integrity or character of the district or adjoining districts. Here, the use is a single family use. The accessory structure is entirely consistent with the neighborhood and the use is allowed by right. So will not impair the integrity or character of the district as to the use, quite frankly, nor with the movement of the barn, but that's not the criteria. The requested use will not by its addition to the neighborhood cause an excess of that particular use. Here, again, the use is not changing. The proposed use is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. Again, the use as a single family use on the property is not changing. The accessory structure exists and will be smaller, and that's not changing either. The proposed use will not be conducted in a manner so as to emit any dangerous, noxious, injurious, or other objectionable impacts. Here, the renovation of the barn will be completed in a manner that is not dangerous, nauseous, or injurious, and will not emit noise, vibration, smoke, or dust, or any other form of environmental pollution. I would point out that the applicant has submitted letters of support from the most immediate neighbor to the east, Ms. Judith Cowan. Also, we are aware that you have received a letter of opposition from an abutter to the rear. Please know we have spoken with the abutter and her attorney. The applicant has full intentions of replacing the fence in the rear with a 6-foot fence. For the applicant will be trimming the dead branches off the large tree in the rear, which overhang the abutter's property. I'd remind the board again that the applicant meets all of the dimensional requirements of the ordinance, both before and after the requested relocation, is not seeking any relief from the board for that particular matter. And with that, we'd request the board issue a DCOD special permit and approve the modifications to the barn and the relocation on the property as proposed this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. All right, members of the ZBA and Attorney Mead, on behalf of the applicant, having completed the presentation, we will go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing and go to the public comment section. I'll ask our planning director, Andy Port, to put up the slide, which he's just done. This is the instructions for public comment. For those of you that might not have done this before, we just ask that you kindly keep your comments, within 2 minutes or so. We don't have a very long docket, so, we use our discretion so that every voice can be heard and every sentiment can be included into the process. With that, we just ask that you click the bottom of your Zoom screen, raise your hand. We will recognize you by name. We then ask that you kindly unmute your mic. In the bottom left, you'll see a microphone icon. If you're not familiar, just click it so that it's green. Mr. Port, our planning director, will unmute your mic from our end. And then we ask again that you give your name and address, and then feel free to speak your mind. You do not have to be for or against necessarily. You're welcome to, but don't feel as though you have to come into a specific column. We just take comment as it comes. Seeing one hand, Erin Genova. Ms. Genova, I will recognize you for public comment. And Andy, if you could kindly unmute Ms. Genova's mic, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. This is actually Attorney Douglas DeShane from Finneran and Nicholson representing Erin D. Genova. Erin is here with me. We're sharing the screen. As was stated, please recall, Ms. D. Genova owns the property at 30 Collins Street, which is actually the property directly behind 276 High Street. As was mentioned, my client did issue a letter in opposition to the proposed relocation back in August of this year. In sum, Ms. DeGenova respects the historical significance of the barn in the Historic Commission's position and would like to see the barn stay in its current location. Additionally, she does have reasonable concerns about how relocating the barn will adversely impact her property and her enjoyment of her property. However, subsequent to that, my client sending the letter, and as was stated by Attorney Mead, we did reach out to the applicant and his attorney to see if my client's concerns could be addressed by the applicant. Unfortunately, despite reasonable efforts by both sides, we were unable to reach an agreement on resolving my client's concerns. So she is actually here this evening, Mr. Chairman, to register her opposition. And so with the board's approval, I'd like to allow her to speak for a minute or two.
Of course, we just ask that she kindly give her name and address for the record, though I know you've already given that.
Sure. Hello, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. My name is Erin DeGenova, and I'm located at 30 Collins Street, Newburyport. So with that being said, I do not support the barn move. I am the owner directly behind 276 High Street. I purchased the property in July of 2020. I knew that there was 2 historic structures directly behind it, and I never anticipated them to be moved or rebuilt or shifted on the lot. I understand and respect the recommendations of the Newburyport Historical Commission that the barn should not be moved. I work as a real estate consultant and understand the general goal of the owner's proposal. However, with that in mind, I would hope the applicant and the zoning board would also consider my viewpoint and work with us for a mutually agreeable solution that works for everyone. I would imagine that the current owner would not appreciate an unexpected 2-story structure relocated 27.5 feet from their primary house either. So hopefully everyone can appreciate my concerns. My additional concerns with the proposed location are as follows. The 2-story carriage house will impede the rear view of my backyard, which is only actually 7 feet from the property line, 10 feet from the farthest point from my house, from that lot line. I basically have little yard as there is. I purchased the structure not expecting a historic barn to be moved closer to my lot line, thereby impeding my line of sight. Placing a carriage home 27.5 feet from the property line would also negatively affect airflow and limit the amount of natural sunlight, making my yard darker. I will be subject to noise, dust, debris during demolition of roof shingles and siding, as well as construction noise. The placement of a 2-story barn or carriage home that close to my lot line will adversely affect my property value significantly. I would recommend that if the board is so inclined to allow a relocation, I would just ask for the following conditions. Number 1, relocation of the rear line of the barn 45 feet from our property line versus the proposed 27.5 feet. This would provide an additional backyard for the applicant of 30 feet rather than the requested 50 feet and would provide space for the driveway that they have as well. It would also fulfill the Newburyport Historical Commission's desire to maintain the street view of the barn. Number 2, plan on applicant's land landscape screening consisting of coniferous trees of adequate size, minimum of 8 to 10 feet, sufficient to reduce the visual impact accordingly. 3, replace and repair the existing fence with the width of property and remove the large tree on the applicant's land that overhangs the fence onto my property. I would at least expect them to trim all the branches overhanging onto the driveway as they do land on my car, as I do not have a garage. Number 4, place construction dumpsters a minimum of 60 feet from the rear lot line to avoid noise, dust, and construction materials and debris. A few other items I'd like to mention that are not included in my letter are pest removal. Do you know if the building department would recommend, if they're moving that existing structure, would they propose for a pest removal service? Is that something that's typically done? I'll keep going. So trimming the tree versus removing it, any pieces that are hanging over onto my driveway side. And one thing that I was asking for, and it wouldn't be a deed restriction, but verbally, the client had mentioned, or the applicant had mentioned, they don't plan on putting any structures directly behind the lot line other than moving the barn. So to have that in writing, if they could just not put anything within, 30 to 40 feet would be ideal. And that is my request. Again, I agree with the NHC. I do not agree with moving the barn, and it will negatively and adversely affect my property value and my enjoyment of my property. Thank you for your time, and appreciate you listening to this matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. DeGenova. And counsel, do you wish to be heard further in regard to this, or may I move on to any other comments?
I think you're talking to Mr. DeShane, is that correct?
That's correct. Attorney DeShane, are you still with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. No, we're finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you, Attorney Mead. Okay, thank you, Attorney DeShane and Ms. DeGenova. Anyone else wish to speak in connection with this matter? I'll recognize Glenn Richards, Chairman of our Newburyport Historic Commission. Mr. Richards, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks very much. Glenn Richards, 6 Kent Street. Speaking for myself here tonight, not speaking on behalf of the
my apologies, of course. So I meant to just recognize you as simply Glenn Richards.
That's perfectly fine. You know who I am anyway. So this the report is what the commission, and it's been Attorney Mead did. I think she fairly accurately reflected what the report said. Anyway, very briefly, I just wanted to thank the applicant and the architect for responding to the comments made in the report. I think that I'm very happy to see that they were willing to reconsider the initial plans. I think the new plans are a significant improvement. In a perfect world, I would have loved to have not seen it moved as far back as they plan to move it. I think I understand why they want to do it. It'd be great. I think technically they might probably not have to move it quite so far back to still not just move it once, but I certainly understand, wanting to keep the movement down to a minimum to avoid damage and so on. So anyway, like I say, ideally, it'd be great if we move so far back, but overall, the plan is a major improvement, and I just wanted to express my appreciation to the applicant and all those involved for doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Recognizing Miss Melissa Rowe. Miss Rowe, if you can hear me, if you could kindly unmute your mic, and Andy, if you can unmute Miss Rowe's mic. Miss Rowe, you have the floor.
Sure. My name is Melissa Rowe. I'm at 28 Collins Street in Newburyport. And I'm just commenting that I oppose moving the barn due to its historic nature, and I agree with the NHC. And if the barn is approved to be moved, I would hope that the suggestions and recommendations submitted by 30 Collins Street and myself should be implemented in fairness. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Anyone else wish to speak in connection with this application? Recognizing the hand of, and I don't have a full name, I just have D. Strout, and forgive me if that's a mispronunciation. Actually, that has disappeared. I do not have a, there we are. So DSTAURT. You could go ahead and unmute that mic, Andy, and D. Stroud, you have the floor. If you could just give us your name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Don Starrett. I live at 46 Oakland Street. And my concern is I abut the property. My concern is only slightly where the location of the barn is going to be, but more is what is the ultimate plan for the property. There were comments made during the presentation about opening new corridors to the entire lot. And the goal being to get the barn out of the way to enable more fulsome use of the yard. And I think it's another thing was said was greater amount of open space on the property. It will create a greater amount of open space on the property. So my concerns are only that that this is just to get the barn out of the way to do other development. And I'm wondering if there's anything the applicant is willing to say about what the ultimate plan is for the property as far as all this open space that we're creating and ways we're enabling. What else is planned for the property? Is this to make room for further development and hopefully not a multifamily development like some of the others we see around our neighborhood popping up? So those are my concerns.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak in connection with this application? Let's see, seeing no further hands. And Mr. Stark, if you could go ahead and just lower your hand for us, just so that we see that you're not looking to be heard again. Seeing no further hands, thank you, sir. Going once, going twice, I'm going to close that portion of the public hearing. And we will go ahead and move now to the segment of the public hearing, which has questions from the board. And we will begin with questions from the board from members of the ZBA, starting with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. I'm going to start with the easy one that was suggested during comments. I just wanted the applicant to comment on any pest control that would be included when dealing with a building that's largely not been in use for a while and kind of dilapidated. So what goes into preparing for any disturbances that might happen when you do something like this?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Lisa Mead on behalf of the applicant. As part of the demolition permit application, the applicant's required to do a number of preliminary.
Crap out of my sneakers with those trees. You want all through your shoes too if they have.
Someone needs to mute.
Yep.
Somebody needs.
Hello, it looks like someone's microphone is on.
No, it's just, itchy crap. That's
hello, Mr. Richards, it looks like your microphone is on. Andy, if you could just mute Glenn Richards' mic.
Yeah, I have done so.
Great. Okay, if you can go ahead and continue.
Sure. Lisa Mead again. So as part of any demolition application in the city of Newburyport and practically anywhere else, I think it's actually a building code requirement. You are required to do a number of things to a structure. You're required to remove the utilities. You're required to do an abatement review, and you are required to do a pest control. I'm not sure how many days. It may be 2 weeks, it may be 30 days, but there's a whole pest control measure you have to put in place before you start to remove the barn, and that's a requirement of the city. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, I wanted to address a couple of the other comments, but I can do so maybe during the question period if they come up, or I'm not sure how you would like me to do that.
Attorney Mead, you could go ahead and address them as they've already come up if you wish to. That's fine.
Sure. I just there's a couple things I point out to the board that, as Scott Brown noted, and you can see in the photographs, this property is surrounded by large mature trees, both along the rear property line and the side property lines. which are not going to be disturbed by the movement of the proposed movement of the barn. And so the idea that somehow the barn being 27.5 feet away from the rear property line is going to impede light and air movement in the rear of this property against the next property isn't quite accurate given the actual mature trees that exist. And more importantly, I want to comment related to the development or potential overdevelopment, if you will, and concern that the gentleman from Oakland Street had. So this property is currently occupied by a tenant. And so one of the things that the applicant wanted to do was to take care of this barn before something happened to it and make sure that it was secure and do that all at one time. The property has just over 90 feet of frontage, which is not sufficient to put a two-family or certainly not a multifamily house on it in the city of Newburyport. And so it will be single family, single family, single family all day long. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. And I have a couple more questions, if I could, Mr. Chairman. And
Please.
it's for anyone on the team here. I would just like a little more information on the jacking up process in order to move the barn. How I know you bring in a special contractor that does this. How high does this barn get jacked up to get it on beams to roll?
Well, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Sturgis because that is certainly not my area of expertise.
Understood.
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Sure can.
Okay, so the jacking process is very methodical and formulaic. And in order to move the barn back onto a new foundation, it's pretty straightforward. We add steel in both directions to pick up all of the timber frame because timber frames are rigid structures unto themselves. They're relatively easy to move from an historical perspective. Buildings are moved all the time in Newburyport and everywhere across New England. So the precedent for moving it is certainly there, but the process is pretty straightforward. I-beams go full length in both directions, and then they go onto another I-beam that has what's called skates on them, which are bearing surfaces that roll the steel along the other steel. And that basically lifts the barn up about 14 inches and moves it safely back. The concern about keeping it in place is that it requires a much higher lift, a much more invasive lift, and a much more, well, I mean, it's all dangerous. I mean, you have to be very, very meticulous and careful about this, but lifting it straight up to dig under it is considerably more labor intensive, more risky for the barn, and certainly more risky for the contractor. And more expensive than simply moving it onto another foundation. That said, the barn will stay together because we'll stitch it together after the additions are removed. So it's not going to fall over. It's not going to topple left or right or anything. It's just very safely moved, but it is easier and more in tune with its best use to keep it as low as we can to the ground and move it onto the foundation. So you're really only elevating it 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet total to get it onto the new foundation. Of course, you have to be above grade to meet code on the new foundation. And parts of that barn are nowhere near that currently. Certainly the additions are not. But so the elevation of the barn itself doesn't change dramatically, just meets code. But it is safer and easier to move it, lengthwise than it is upwards. I hope that makes sense. And basically, I do use a very specific contractor for that work, and that's all he does. And he's very, very good at it. Does that answer your question?
No, that does for the most part. And then I'm curious as to a little more detail, what foundation needs to be built to have this restored barn sit?
Well, if we're going to put that much energy into the barn, you're doing a full frost wall. And in this case, it's a slab because a lot of the flooring in the original barn is not original anymore. And I'll just add one side note. All of the additions have been modified again and again, like in the 40s and the 60s. They're coming apart at the seams because they're just stick frames.
Right.
But so I believe the intent, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, is to do a perimeter frost wall to, that's code compliant, and a slab to have the barn sit on.
Yes, that's correct, Aaron.
Yeah.
So, and just going to stick on this. So I understand the cost component of it. In order to keep the barn in the same location, are there two choices? One, to jack it up higher in order to try to do the more difficult foundation work, or just roll it back?
Right, that's the two options.
So those two options, right? So
yeah, those are the two options. If you're forced to do the foundation under the building,
yep,
it's considerably a different project than just simply rolling it at grade on the steel. And you have to dig up, you're basically doing everything underneath the building, which is, it's problematic.
Understood.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions. Any further questions?
Okay.
Very good. Then moving on to, still in questions, we will go to Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, just following up with Mr. Moore's line of questioning there. So I get it that lifting it way up in the air and then working under it is expensive and dangerous. But couldn't you just slide it back like 10, 15 feet, dig a new foundation, and then slide it forward and put it on it? Wouldn't that be a lot less risky than putting it up in the air and trying to work under it?
You could move it back and do it that way as well. That's another option.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
The other question I had, I've heard the Historic Commission referenced an awful lot in tonight's hearing. And, both by the applicant many times and by some of the abutters. But when the chair of the Historic Commission spoke, I was a little confused. I guess he spoke for himself, not the commission. But I guess there were two outstanding questions as were put to us in the staff report that I wanted to ask about. One was, is the new addition, is the barn renovation being done following the secretary's guidelines? And, I see the pictures and they're all well documented and they're all annotated. But I was just wondering if the chair of the Historical Commission could comment upon, and I realize it was fancier in an earlier version. This one's better. Does this one now meet you guys' feeling for the right renovation? Could I put that question to Mr. Richards?
Andy, you can unmute Glenn Richards' mic, and Mr. Richards, if you wish to respond, you're welcome to.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, my profound apologies. I could have sworn my mic was muted earlier. Anyway, it gets complicated. The standards when you're dealing with restoring something to the way it was before, some of the objections we had to the original plan, I don't know if you folks saw on the ZBA saw the original plan, that the overall design of the carriage house or the new barn was going to be quite substantially different than what the original was there. And there was, in this case, there was documentary evidence. That's what the standards do look for. They don't want what someone thinks what might have been right or what might have looked. For example, the cupola. If there was no evidence that there was ever a cupola on the original, it would have been not recommended to, or be recommended not to add something like that, just because you like the way it looked, whatever. It wouldn't be historically accurate. In this case, I don't remember, I'm away in Vermont actually at the moment. I don't have all the original drawings and stuff to remember exactly what they showed us of the original, but it looked like what the current plans are a fairly faithful representation of what the carriage house originally looked like. As far as, so that addresses the design part. As far as the location, there was considerable discussion about that, and that the standards do talk about the relationship between the primary house, the residence and the accessory structure. And the commission was concerned about that. And I believe that's reflected in the report. There was, we didn't want to lose that sense of relationship, and that, so when I spoke earlier, my apologies if it was confusing to anyone. I was speaking just on my own behalf, I was very happy to see that most of the recommendations were followed through on. But, there is that sticking point about the location. Ideally, you would want to keep the relationship between the primary structure and the accessory building as much as possible. Maybe adjust it a little bit, but basically keep it, approximately what it historically was or would have been. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm basically, in a nutshell, you're saying, the details and whatnot of the building look fine now, but it's just the location that are giving you guys pause. That's kind of what I'm hearing as far as the proposal on the table.
I should be careful here because, we haven't, the commission has not met to look at the new plans or anything like that. So I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to, try to imagine what the commission would say about them. But I know earlier, and based on what the original discussion was, though, I know that I would be very surprised if anyone had any problem with the design as it stands now, but probably people would be concerned about it being moved so far back. That would be a likelihood, but obviously I can't say for sure.
Okay, I appreciate you being as honest as possible. I'm confused, though, because the report from the Historical Commission says rather bluntly, the original structure should not be moved back to the rear of the lot. So I'm confused. Did they say that or not?
Yes, we did say that.
Okay. All right. It's very confusing the way you're describing it. So, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably should, sometimes I should follow my the advice I sometimes get to keep my mouth shut. But I was very pleased about the other aspects of it. I felt it was I hope that they don't have to, they can do it in a way that doesn't move it so far back. And it sounds like your questions are exploring that possibility. And maybe I didn't make it clear enough that ideally that is what both myself and the commission would obviously prefer. You're quite correct that the report, which summarized the feelings of the commission as a whole, was pretty straight about that.
Okay, I appreciate it very much. I thought the rest of the presentation was very thorough and clear. I have no other questions. Thank you.
All right, very good. Let's see. I believe we are moving on to Mr. Shannon.
Chair, I've got no questions. My cohorts have asked the questions that were on my mind. So I've got no further questions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Mr. Bennick.
I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bennick. And I too have no questions that haven't already been addressed. So we can close the questions from the board portion of the public hearing and go into deliberations. In deliberations, of course, we need to tailor our deliberations around the criteria that's before us on the request. This is a special permit and a special permit under the DCOD specifically. So I believe all the members of the ZBA are familiar with. There are let's see, there are 9 criteria that must be met under the DCOD. That's section 10H7 of the Newburyport zoning ordinance. And anyone who's listening in can also reference this on the city materials. So we'll go into deliberation, starting with Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Well, as I think Mr. Rich has tried to, or did convey as a member, not a member of the committee, but as a resident, I think there are a lot of positives to take from this proposal as we've seen, especially with the design of the barn. Taking down the later added structures that are tearing it apart is a good thing. Repairing it for future generations to enjoy is a great thing. Bringing back historic nature with a couple of additions, as we saw in the Historic Commission report, I think adds a lot of character to it. And then, even with the consideration to just move it straight back from the original idea to move it up, back and to the left to quarter movie. But there's a lot of positives here, but I still struggle, which I think Mr. Swanton was on board with that a little bit too, with the historical report and the fact that the structure had specifically been listed as contributory on the data sheets they thought was unusual and significant. So there's always talk about accessory structures, and it's even included in the presentation today. I think it was the building, the barn itself was referred to as an accessory structure, and it's true, while it is an accessory structure, the reason that we're here is that it's contributory structure from a historical standpoint, hence the DCOD issue that we're involved with. So one thing that the board felt, and that I'm kind of agreeing with here, is that the historical relationship is what makes it contributory with respect to distance from the house. And I haven't found that moving the proposal to move it straight back versus back into the back corner really makes a difference on the sight lines of the house. And I'm just eyeballing here, but with the smaller structure and kind of going from the front corner of the barn to what the corner of, the back protruding portion of the house, I don't see where even moving it straight forward closer to the original position, it's impinging on many views from the house. Admittedly so that I haven't been in the house to see this, but just from looking at it from my standpoint, I'm having a hard time finding that if it was left in place, it would just be blocking too much of the view from the house. Nothing would change with the yard, and it would keep the historic nature from a spatial relationship intact. So I'm still struggling with that, especially when there's other ways to do this. Again, a lot of positives to this, without a doubt. I think the design of it is, I think it's perfect. I don't think I would change the design, but I'm struggling with moving at all. So that's where I am right now.
Mr. Chair, I know this is deliberation, but I just want to make a correction so that everybody's speaking off of the same set of facts.
Okay, feel free, Attorney Mead.
Mr. Moore, you commented about the location of the barn. Andy, could you go to the photographs of the barn for a minute? Or even the photographs or the old drawings, whatever. So just to be clear, the existing section of the barn that's being saved is the left-hand side, not the right-hand side. And so the comment relative to impeding the backyard, if you were just to pick the barn up and repair it and put it back down, is not accurate, because we have moved it over in the back a little bit as we've moved it back because of the angles. So I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Okay, so I thought that was an important fact that.
Okay, was there anything else, Attorney Mead?
No, that I just wanted to make that correction.
All right, very good. Let's see. I believe we are at in deliberations still. Mr. Swanton.
I think Mr. Moore already described some of what I'm struggling with on this one. So I don't really have anything else to add beyond what he's already said.
Okay, Mr. Swanton, thank you. Mr. Bennett?
Yeah. Is Mr. Shagnon here? Or would he like to weigh in, or I'll be glad to go?
Either way, you go ahead, Mr. Bennett. I'll go next.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that.
I apologize. I skipped Mr. Shagnon. Mr. Shannon, Bud, you're next, I believe.
All right. Floor is mine. Thank you. I guess I have some concerns with the location of the barn being so far back in the property. With that said, I'm not glued to it going back in the same place that it exists today. And I think it is smart of the applicant to slide it towards the lot line so it comes back into view from the front yard, if you will. So I guess my only concern is, it looks like we're pushing it back two or three building sizes where one might be fine and in other words, maybe 20 feet instead of 40 or 50 feet. And that might still meet the engineer's requirements that you don't want to pick it up, dig a foundation under it and put it back down. I know that's quite costly. So that's my only concern, is that it's located so far back that to use some of the other architects' phrases, it becomes extremely subordinate to the main house. It may actually look like it's not in the same yard. So that's my only concern. I think the design is wonderful. I like the fact that, again, they slid it towards the lot line, so it's easier to see from the street. But my only concern is the distance from the original placement. I'm not stuck on the 1 to 2 feet that the historical commission recommends, but something in between 1 or 2 feet and 30 or 40 feet is probably where I'm at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Mr. Bennett, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple observations. One, I guess we start, I think we must recognize what we have before us as a historic structure that over the years has been impaired by shoddy, architecturally unfaithful additions, not improvements. And that what we have before us is an effort to, one, to take that carriage house or barn as faithfully as one can restore its architectural significance. And hearing the comments this evening, it would appear that the structure, the barn, is faithful to the historic architectural values, which is a positive. Secondly, it's pretty clear that these additions over the years have impaired the integrity of this historic structure, and therefore they had no value and in fact are detrimental, and it's appropriate for them to be removed. Third, what we have then left is a structure which is smaller in size, architecturally faithful to the building, the residence, and based upon the updated plans, relocated such that its visual connection with the home, primary residence on High Street remains. So then this gets me to the notion of what is, according to the Historic Commission, a natural or unnatural relationship between this carriage house and the primary residence. And that was intriguing to me. It was so intriguing to me that I made some anecdotal effort to peruse and walk through our beautiful city to see if there is any, what I could observe at least, any consistency or consistency between a main structure and a carriage house. And I also tried to find anything in the literature which would support the notion that this relationship is currently natural and the relationship moving this barn back would be, quote, unnatural, according to the Historic Commission. I found no such evidence, and there's no such evidence in the Historic Commission's report. So that being said, natural versus unnatural is somewhat subjective term. I will tip my hat to the Historic Commission that they have more expertise than I do in this. However, I am troubled that I find no anecdotal evidence to support that or any literature evidence to support what would be a natural relationship. And with that being said, I'm not convinced that that recommendation is compelling to me. Then I guess I consider the well-stated comments from the neighbors. And I think what carries the day for me in this regard is that many of the concerns, if not all of the current concerns addressed by the neighbors, are reflected in the zoning ordinance itself, and specifically the side and rear yard setback requirements, which this application meets. Therefore, we would have a different story if this were to be located within those side or rear yard setbacks, but we don't. Therefore, the city council has adopted a zoning ordinance, which has adopted side and rear yard setbacks, and those implicitly would take into account concerns such as property values, airflow, sight lines, visual impairments, and the like. As much as I am sympathetic to the residents' comments, I believe that because this proposal is well within the setback, the side and rear yard setbacks, I think that is satisfactory to me. So long story short, I guess I disagree with the Historic Commission here on how far this structure must be. And if we're just negotiating, in my view, we either honor the Historic Commission and make it 1 or 2 feet, but there's no support in the record in any way to broker a distance, unless we're just trying to find some middle ground based upon nothing but what we feel is correct. So that's kind of my observations.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. My comments, not so as to not repeat anything that's already been said, I have to commend my colleagues for a thoughtful and in some instances, meticulous analysis of what we've been presented. We as a board are often challenged with having to toil through a lot of the very granular detail of these sorts of applications and attempt to be balanced and fair, and also be honorable to the zoning ordinance, as well as the legal criteria that we must find. However, the discretion is narrow, but it does exist. I agree with Mr. Bennick's analysis, to be quite honest, and certainly with the greatest respect to my colleagues on the Historical Commission. I do not disagree with their analysis, nor would I purport to challenge their expertise, because I simply do not have a credible position to do that. I do disagree with the conclusion for the reasons that I believe are within our purview, and I think all of our expertise that Mr. Bennick had pointed out. I am moved by I think Mr. Bennick mentioned the architectural faithfulness of the proposed plan. I believe it's smaller and more cohesive, and sometimes we as humans just simply distill our thoughts down to just the very basic of what feels right, with credibility and attention to the calculus of the detail here, and I'm trying to do that, but I simply can't. I feel like I can support this and have to very respectfully and courteously disagree with my colleagues on the Historical Commission on this one, and as equally respectfully disagree with the conclusions of some of the comments of members of the public, though I certainly empathize and understand fully and respect the positions that they're coming from. But the legal criteria is what drives us as a board, and so we must rise and fall by along those lines, for better or for worse. So if I'm being authentic to that criteria and making a decision, I have to find that I too can support this for the reasons that I believe my colleagues pointed out, or at least Mr. Bennick had articulated. So that's where I fall on this as well. Any further deliberations, members of the board, before I close this portion? Seeing no panelist interjections, I will close this portion of the public hearing, at which point we will elicit a vote. And if I haven't mentioned this earlier, for those that may not be familiar, because we run by a modified version of Robert's Rules of Order, to move a matter to a vote, a member of the ZBA must make a motion to approve. It does not mean that that member of the ZBA intends to vote in the affirmative or support the application. It's merely the technical means by which the matter is advanced for a second. And if it is moved, if a motion's made and seconded, we then take roll call. And then in order for an application to be successful, 4 of the 5 voting members this evening must vote in the affirmative. With
Mr.
that,
Chair?
do we have a motion? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, Lisa
Yes.
Mead. Unless any of the other 3 members, Mr. Moore, Mr. Swanton, and Mr. Chagnon, were also so moved by Mr. Bennett and your comments, and I haven't heard to the contrary that they have been, we would request a continuance unless one of them corrects me if I'm wrong.
No, and that's a fair comment, Attorney Mead. And so members of the ZBA, I think it's fair when an applicant, and historically, we've always tried to do this so as to prevent an inadvertent vote when an applicant has a right to request a continuance to further refine an application. Taking a straw poll, are there any members that feel as though they can support this application? I believe Mr. Bennett, if I'm not mistaken, it appears, are you inclined to support this application? And if you're willing to share that, and any other members, just so that we can get a sense for the benefit of the applicant and allow them to make a decision.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Moore, 2 things. First of all, I thank Attorney Mead for pointing out my mischaracterization of the barn, the fact that it's getting moved back and to the right to improve the visibility from being where it is now was very helpful. And I also found Mr. Bennett's explanation, reasoning, and thoughtfulness in his opinion on this compelling. And we have to strive to make our decisions based on the facts of the application, the ordinance, and what we should be presiding over and what we don't preside over. So I thought he made a compelling case, and I think I can move to support this.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Swanton. And this is just a straw sentiment, if you're willing to share, not at all a vote yet.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with Mr. Moore, in part because I don't think, if there was a point to be made by the Historic Commission, I don't think it came through very forcefully. So I kind of concur with Mr. Moore, and I can support it as is.
All right, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Shannon, do you wish to be heard as well?
Yeah, sure. I guess, as I stated, I wasn't locked on the 1 to 2 foot location that the Historical Commission was suggesting. I was looking for, a happy medium, but with that said, I think Mr. Bennett's arguments were, again, compelling. I could also support the proposal as put forth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Attorney Mead, having heard the board members informally share their sentiment, do you wish to be heard on a motion to continue, or do you wish us to proceed with a vote?
I would like the board to proceed with a vote, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Mead. Okay, members of the ZBA, having concluded and closed our deliberations, I will ask, is there a member of the ZBA who wishes to make a motion and a second on this application?
This is Greg Bennett. With respect to DCOD special permit application 2021-484276 High Street, I would move to approve the application.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Do we have a second on the motion to approve by Mr. Bennett?
Mr. Shagnon will second it.
Thank you, Mr. Shagnon. The motion is made by Mr. Bennett and seconded by Mr. Shannon to approve the special permit to grant a special permit under the DCOD. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the special permit is approved. Thank you, Attorney Mead and applicant and members of our community who also spoke. I wish to thank you for your time and Mr. Richards, though I know you spoke just on behalf of yourself, The input by the board that you happen to chair is also, the commission you happen to chair is also always valuable to our boards. We have an ever-standing thank you to you and your colleagues for that input.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board.
Very good. Moving now to our second and last public hearing this evening. This is the special permit for nonconformities being brought by applicant Michelle Simone on behalf of Kim Goulet, 5 Helena Street. This is a special permit for nonconformities to construct an addition over an existing deck. May we hear from the applicant?
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Simone, and I am just making a presentation here tonight for my client, Kim Goulet, at 5 Helena, as you mentioned. We would like to propose to add an additional 172 square feet of living space by building over.
Michelle, could I just interrupt? Sorry, just as the host, if you have another device on in the room, if you could perhaps mute one just so that we don't have an echo.
Absolutely, I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
How's that?
That's great, thank you.
Okay, terrific. Sorry about that. Okay, so what we're showing here now is the existing foundation plan of the house. And the next shot is showing what the proposed framing plan would be for the house. So we are not proposing to go outside of the existing footprint of the home, and we're not proposing to go beyond the existing roof line. What we are proposing to do, if we can go to the next frame and take a look at the existing floor plan, is on the top of the screen and the proposed is on the bottom. So what the proposal is to just add a second bedroom to the house, adding about 172 square feet of living space, keep the deck on the backhand side. And when we close in a portion of the existing deck, that's how we were able to gain a little bit of extra space there for another bedroom. Not adding any more bathrooms, not doing anything to the kitchen or anything like that. In the next shot, we'll see the elevation showing the front side of the house where the front door would be located. The top photo is the existing conditions and the bottom is the proposed. And you can see the roof line is where the addition is. It actually comes down a little bit lower than what the existing roof line is. And on the next few frames, we can see all of the north, south, east, and west sides of the house and how it would end up once the build would be complete. And then we get to, this is just showing the next shot is a schedule of windows that proposed to be on the house. And then the next photo is the house in its original condition from a neighbor's yard. And the next are the condition of the house at the moment, which is the new bedroom built with the deck on the side. And the next photo after that shows just another side view of the additional bedroom. So the client had gone through the approval process back in February for conservation, and that had been all approved. She had hired someone to help her sort through all the permitting processes and everything, and thought that everything had been applied for and approved. And during the process of everything, found out that this last permit had not been discussed and approved. And so here we are this evening, just bringing it forward, hoping we can gain approval.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Simone. Was there anything else you wanted to add, or was there anyone else that you wanted us to hear from before we moved along?
No, I'm here with the homeowner in case any questions come up that someone wanted to direct anything directly to her. But other than that, that's it.
Very good. All right. Closing that portion of the public hearing, we'll now go to the public comment section. And of course, there's only 2 attendees, both of whom are here in connection with this, I believe. Anyone who wishes to speak in connection with the application, just kindly raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will open your mic and recognize you, and please give your name and address if you please. Seeing no hands going once, going twice, I will close that portion of the public hearing. Seeing no hands having been raised, and we will go into questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. I just wanted to get back to how the construction commenced to the very advanced stage before being before us for a special permit. Can you go how that timeline worked out? And I mean, ultimately the homeowner is responsible for making sure everything's taken care of, but how did this get to the point where we're looking at a 60%, 70% done project and here to ask for the special permit to do it?
Right, right. So yeah, it was a surprise to all of us. We, like I said, the homeowner had her meetings with conservation and had everything approved in regards to that back in February. And we met with the homeowner sometime in March or April and came to an agreement about the construction of the project. And we applied for a building permit back on April 22nd. And we had a $1,100 fee to pay for the permit, which we did. And we had called into the building department. I had an assistant of mine pick it up way back then, and it sat in my office for a couple of months. And we got started on the work. It was probably June or July. And I had called into the building department because I was putting together a packet that needs to be kept on site for the build with all of the information from conservation. There has to be a packet that's kept all the time with the plans and the permit and everything. So anyone coming on site would have access to it. And going through my files, I wasn't seeing the permit. So I called for a copy of it. And we just think that this, I don't know if it led to a question about the processes of it all, but when I applied for the permit, it was in paper form, and they have since switched over to computer, and it went down to the zoning department from there, which they realized that this had not been signed off on for this part of the portion. So they shut the project down at that point to say we needed to go through this to have this all approved. And so we haven't been working on it since, just waiting for this hearing to gain approval for this last piece of the puzzle.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of wondering the same thing that my colleague, Mr. Moore, just asked. I couldn't quite follow the story. So was it the building department that kind of overlooked getting a permit here, or was it the applicant?
I guess, I think the way the process works is you apply for the building permit, and then it goes through all the departments in the city hall.
But then
And I think,
yeah.
Yeah, and at that point, it should have or could have been discovered that it just didn't get done or didn't get approved at that point. I'm not sure how. The only thing I can think is the transfer between paper to computer, or, I don't know. I don't know.
But did it come back to you as an approved building permit that you could like stick in the window like you usually do?
It did way back in April.
Okay, all right. I don't know if Andy, if anybody else wants to chime in there from the planning department,
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a great question from the member in light of all of our efforts to improve the permit processes, of late. There has been a transition to online permitting. I'm not sure that would be a factor here necessarily. The zoning administrator does kind of keep an eye on, what's happening from her sign-offs. So I don't know if Caitlin recalls any details. We'd have to defer to Jennifer and the building office as to the dates of their sign-offs or approvals and how that was processed. But again, I don't want to speak on their behalf.
All right. Let me move on, because one thing that wasn't in the presentation, the little table that shows us the FAR calculation, and the dimensional things. Okay, there it is. If you could blow up that little section down the bottom there. Yeah, down the bottom. Anyway, while they're blowing it up, I you know, we've often gotten advice from the planning department about being careful about overbuilding on Plum Island. But, you know, and I've often objected to ones that go over the guideline of 25% floor area ratio. And this one, you can barely read, but the second line from the bottom, this little building is only at 7.5% and it's only going to 9 and a fraction.
Correct.
So that's a long way from 25. So, you know, despite the mess up wherever it happened with the building permit process, I usually jump on these things, but I have no problem with people improving or adding on to their houses on Plum Island. It just, you know, I get concerned when it's overbuilt, but you're so far from the 25% where you tip it into overbuild that I really don't have any questions with your proposal. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Let's see, moving on to Mr. Shannon.
Yeah, one question for the applicant. The photograph that showed the construction work that was done, the building, if you will, in the green, is that the 172 square foot addition?
That is only part of it.
So is there more to the left as we're looking at this picture here?
No, what it is half of that addition was a bedroom that already came out. If you look at the photos, the original photos, there was already half of a bedroom that came out and we just expanded around it, staying on the same footprint.
You might be able to see that a little better on the drawing that shows the existing floor plan versus proposed. It might be a little bit easier to see. So yeah, so
see the top photo? That's the existing. That bedroom came out on a deck.
Yeah.
And that's decking all around it. So all we did was we kept a portion of the deck and then we expanded out about, you know, 170 square feet around the current bedroom.
Great. Okay, understood. Thank you. No more questions, Chair.
All right, very good. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I just want to be sure I understand. You received a signed building permit?
yes,
Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay.
Otherwise, we wouldn't have ever started work like this without.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure I heard that correctly.
I know it was.
I take Mr. Swan's point on the implications of the application. Were we starting from scratch here? So I don't have a problem with it, but I must say, if, for example, this project had an additional bathroom, I, for one, would have been in a very uncomfortable position because I would have frowned upon that application probably. So I would hope we don't get into this situation again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. And I don't have any further questions other than the questions that have already been asked by my colleagues. So I will close this portion of the public hearing and we can go into deliberations. And again, as we deliberate, we are deliberating on the criteria of a special permit for nonconformity. So I just ask my colleagues to tailor their deliberations around the legal criteria for a special permit, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Ciampetti. Not encouraging applicants to come in the form of forgiveness rather than special permission. That aside, I'll take the explanation at its word, and to get to the point of the matter, it's been mentioned by colleagues as far as the floor area ratio. It's stay on the same footprint, minuscule and well under the limit. So from a proposal standpoint, I can support it. I just don't want to encourage people just to kind of get started and then come back and ask. So it doesn't sound like that's what happened, but your ears perk up. But I can support it on a special permit. It's not creating any new nonconformities, and I don't see it being any more detrimental to the PIOD or the neighborhood, just basically covering up more of the existing deck. So that's where I am. I can support it.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I mean, I too was concerned about looking at a project that's already partially built, but I think I'll take the applicant, I mean, if they got a signed building permit, that sounds like the problem's on the city side, not their side. And as I said earlier, this is such a modest thing. I like being able to support an improvement on Plum Island. I'm often concerned about overbuilding, but this one is clearly not that. This one does not it's on the same footprint. It doesn't change much. There's no encroachment on any lot lines. So I can support this.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. And Mr. Chenin.
I ditto the comments made by my colleagues. I don't think there's any new nonconformities. I don't think it's more detrimental to the neighborhood. It is a modest addition, well within the fire limit. So as previously stated, I can support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Chenin. Mr. Bennett.
I endorse the comments from my colleagues, although I must say that additional bedroom after additional bedroom after additional bedroom without the addition of a bathroom will over time result in a cumulative impact. So I don't think I'm at that point here yet on this application, given its modest size and overall scale. But I do have that concern, as Mr. Swanton does, and I think we all do, about whether we have the appropriate tools here to address development on Plum Island. So, but on this one, I'm good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I share the sentiments of my colleagues. I think that this is an appropriate application. I'm not overwhelmed in my sentiment in that regard by the fact that it's, the timing of it. I guess I understand that. But I believe it's appropriate, and I feel like had it come to us in this manner before any construction started and then stopped, I would be supporting it as well. So I too can support it. Unless there are any further deliberations, I will close that portion of the public hearing. And do we have a motion to approve from a member of the ZBA and a second?
I'd like to make a motion. I'm Ken Swanton. I'd like to move to approve special permit for nonconformities for 5 Helena Street, file number 2021-50.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Do we have a second?
Second to Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Moore. Calling the roll on the motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Channon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it and the motion carries. Thank you very much, Ms. Simone, you and your client. Good luck to you, and appreciate your patience this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. And that concludes the public hearings for our ZBA this evening. So with that, we can move into our business meeting. We have the minutes from Gretchen Joy for the meeting of August 24th, 2021. Do we have any comments, changes, red lines, or in the alternative, do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Anyone have any comments or changes to the minutes? Hearing no replies, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Mr. Moore.
Very good. Do we have a second?
Second, Greg Bennett.
Thank you. Was that Mr.
Bennett?
Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Bennett. Motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Bennett on the motion to approve the minutes. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Channon.
Yes.
And Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Moving to the last item on our business meeting, updates from the chair. I don't have any updates, but do we have any updates from our planning director?
I don't think anything. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are questions about anything that's going on. We did try to loop you in on the discussion of the I-95 corridor zoning for tomorrow night, but if there's any questions about that or anything else, just let me know.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Port?
No, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to be the kid that asked for homework because you forgot to give it out. But you were going to, I think, poll on whether we're going to do our Zoom meetings by video and include video versus just audible.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. So
I got to be that guy, I know, but
yeah, no, we can plan. We can certainly plan to start video. Start putting ourselves on video for the next hearing.
If that's agreeable with everyone, I know it'd come up, and I don't.
Is everyone okay with that, or does anyone object to that for the moment, or we can also just wait to go live when we go live.
This is Mr. Swan. I think we should try it. I mean, we're one of the few boards now that does not do it. And I know tonight's meeting only went, almost 2 hours with 2 topics. I do think some of our meetings go so late. I think it might help as far as, trying to do what the other boards do. And maybe we won't have to meet quite as long.
Very good. All right. All right, I have no objection. Andy, why don't we, we'll plan on doing a live video, and we'll give everyone the option if they don't want to appear on video, by members of by that I mean members of the public. We'll ask that all of us try to appear via video, but we understand if sometimes that's not in the cards. But some members of the public, do choose to stay, with just a photo placeholder, so we can, I'll let everyone make that choice as they see fit, but we will, as a board, endeavor to be live video. Sound fair?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds fair.
All right. Do we have, then without any further business, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, motion's made and seconded. All those in favor, you can just say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. The ayes have it, and the meeting's adjourned.